Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. This is your channel for photography, for wildlife, and for wildlife photography. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the behavior of our subjects and how to apply it to our photography to improve the results. You're really going to enjoy this one, and we'll get to it right after this. Now welcome back, and in today's video, we're talking about predicting the behavior of species to improve the results of our photography. I've got a couple of questions to start this video out, but before I do want to mention this is part of a three-part series on predicting things that will improve our photography. We're going to be talking about predicting the behavior of species in today's video. We're also going to be talking about looking at individual behaviors and how we can maximize the results using those observations. We're also going to be talking about predicting locations. I think you're going to find all three of these videos really interesting. Before we jump into some of these images, and I've got a lot of examples today, I want to thank my Patreon members. They have included submissions for today's video. So I've broken this video down. I'm going to have a lot of examples. As always, I'm the practical wildlife photographer. I'm going to show you how these ideas relate to actual images, and I'm going to share some of those images from my Patreon community. Now, before we start talking about behavior and I show you the list of ideas for today's video, I'm going to start this with a philosophical question. I'm very curious about this. You can answer this at any time and still watch the video. So as I talk about this concept, I want you to go down in the comments and answer this. What will improve you as a wildlife photographer more? And it's a binary choice. You have two options. You can only pick two. First option, you are great at understanding your wildlife subjects. So think of yourself as just a person who loves wildlife primarily, and you have a great understanding of their behavior. You know everything about them. The second choice is you are an amazing photographer, generalist photographer. You know everything about it. You've got the gear, great lenses, you know how everything works. You understand photography. You are a master of photographer. And those are your binary choices. Which will help you more? As a wildlife photographer, there's no right or wrong answer here. Will it help you more to be an expert on wildlife and its behaviors? Or will it help you more to be an expert photographer who shoots wildlife? Now that is the choice down. Let me know down in the comments below. This video is going to talk about behavior. I think, honestly, you need both to be a great wildlife photographer. If I had to lean a certain way, I might lean toward understanding the behavior more. I think it's close. Being a great photographer who doesn't understand wildlife often will not produce great images. I'm going to talk about this in a separate video because I might even call some people out on that one. So stay tuned. But for right now, let's get into the list. We're going to talk about these behaviors. I'm going to show you some examples. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. And thanks to my Patreon members for jumping in. Here we go. And I want to thank Daniel Gomez for getting us started, a Patreon member for years. And he included this image of a golden-cheeked warbler. And this first idea is around habitat and nesting. I've got a couple ideas or a couple examples here that I'm going to show you that really illustrate this. Daniel mentioned that in watching these golden-cheeked warblers, they like this habitat that is almost eye level, low growth. By the way, there are a lot of bird species particular that prefer either high growth or low growth. And in this case, knowing the behavior of the species leads to an exact eye level shot. And by the way, just a gorgeous composition when you talk about balance and enough open space up in front there. I'm really proud of Daniel as a student. And he has been just a tremendous photographer who gets better every year. A wonderful example of knowing a species habitat and maybe even their nesting behaviors and how to improve that. Next image over here is from Shelly Palamaki, and she had noticed these varied thrush. And this is a species of thrush similar to a robin, by the way. For those of you who are familiar with American robins, often like to dwell on the ground. And as she noticed, this species would often move from the tree down to the ground to feed. This was an area where she kind of set up and just waited. Beautiful mossy log, lovely composition. Love this pose with the little turn back. And just a couple of really quick examples. And we could show just hundreds, if not thousands of examples of using habitat to improve our prediction of where birds are going to be or any animal is going to be for wildlife photography. And then applying that and getting set up and being ready. A lot of this video is going to be about predicting the behavior And then you'll see us be ready, be there, be anticipating the action, and then responding with some really, really nice images. Now, in addition to where birds live and nest, we want to talk about migration really quick because this is an important concept. This, by the way, I'll list the people below me when they contribute. If it's my image, I'll try to give you an idea of the time of the year, the location. If I'm fortunate enough, maybe I'll even put some of the settings down there below me. I wanted to include this as a specific example about migration because migration is very, very different than a nesting or wintering bird. During migration, things change quite a bit. So this story behind this image is that this is a Lincoln sparrow, and I had been photographing. I started my photography in 2013, maybe 2014. I started to buy some equipment. By 2018 and 19, I started to become much better at the craft. Most of it around this idea of knowing what's going to happen, predicting things, and being set up for it. This is a Lincoln sparrow. I had never seen one. It'd been about 5 years, and I thought, I've got to find this. Now, with a Lincoln sparrow, I could go there every year and photograph half a dozen without any problem, without even trying. And it's because over the years, I've determined in this migration pattern, where are they going to be and what habitats do they like to be in? So I'm using this idea of this predicting behavior of this species. I don't know about the individual. Maybe some of the same individuals come back, but I know as a species, this species is going to return for about 2 weeks in October every single year. I also know, and this will tie in, you're going to see some tie-ins to some of my other videos coming up about locations, that this location is going to time with the blooming of goldenrod. Certain goldenrods bloom a little bit earlier in my area, like August and early September. Some bloom a little bit later in September, early October. This one blooms in the end of September, early October, which coincides with these Lincoln sparrows' arrival. So now I've tied in not just the prediction of when this bird might be there, but I've also tied in some of the other elements, including locations and environment. So really, really neat example, I think. And I'm gonna move pretty quickly. I've got a lot of topics to cover here. So we're gonna only show like 1 or 2 examples per topic. And I wanna get into this next one, which is predicting a species behavior around routines. Really, really easy example here. As you know, as if you're a bird photographer especially, but any animal probably follows certain daily routines. I can remember being down in southern Texas. I had never photographed a lot of meadowlarks because we don't have tons of them in PA, unfortunately. But I noticed on this one road that I was driving one morning, there were meadowlarks everywhere. I could hear them almost every half mile or so, and another male singing. So I decided to go back the next day and use that idea of predictive behavior. If I knew that these were singing and often perched, could I set myself up somewhere? And I found one of these perches, and sure enough, there were 2 or 3 meadowlarks on these fence posts. They were really nice because the fence posts didn't look man-made. So I took advantage of these kind of worn, weathered posts. And I got some really, really nice shots in the early morning. You could see this just at first light with this meadowlark singing. Now, the interesting thing is, while meadowlarks might sing throughout the day, this was probably the best opportunity to capture this shot, not just because of the great light, because of the amount of activity that occurred right at daybreak. Conversely, knowing species, I'm going to show you another image that is quite different. It took me several years to get reliable shots of short-eared owls. And short-eared owls are very, very different in terms of what they like. They are often not active at all during the day. We consider these animals to be crepuscular. They are most active at dusk and dawn. And what I have found over the years is that dusk is actually the prime opportunity for short-eared owls. So knowing that allows me to be there when the animal is most active. The interesting thing here is they often don't come out until the sun actually goes below the horizon. And that was the case here. I was photographing, the sun was going down. There were a few photographers here. This isn't a private area. It was a pretty well-known area. Many photographers started to pack up and leave because the sun had gone down. I decided to stay because I knew that activity would continue, and I was able to capture what I think is a pretty nice image. And you could see the background, those colors are those blue hour colors, not the golden hour colors. You'll also notice some movement in the wings, which is occurring from that very slow shutter speed because there's not a lot of available light. That does require some other skills in terms of panning when you're shooting at that slow of a shutter speed, but just a really quick example about how you can observe certain animals, or in this case, certain birds, routines to know what time of the day might be best for what they are doing. Now, one of the routines is going to be around feeding, and I want to show you this couple images that really coincide with feeding. Now, this one is by Rosalind Phillips, and it's just a really great example of knowing that this common yellowthroat is going to typically nest very low. We've already talked about habitat and nesting. You might know that a bird is feeding, but if it's 50 feet over your head, it's probably not going to do a lot of good. But knowing that at this time of the year, this particular bird was going to be feeding its young allowed Rosalind to be in the right place at the right time. And one of the impressive things about these birds when they gather food, if you could see what's in this, I'm going to leave it up for a minute. If you could see what's in its mouth, this is not like one caterpillar. There's some insects and moths, caterpillars, there's all kinds of stuff. These birds collect a lot of food and then they bring it back to the nest. And we'll talk a little bit about this idea of nesting in this video. I'm going to tie it in here around feeding because for me, the act of feeding and nesting become a little bit involved. One of the things to note is the time of the year that it's happened. So again, as you are looking at species, when do they do this? When do they migrate? When do they breed? When do they feed? All of those things come into play. And if I know that these common yellowthroats are going to be actively feeding at a specific time of the year, and each area is going to be a little bit different, but if I know that, I can really maximize these opportunities. I'm going to move quickly through a couple more of mine when it talks about feeding. I know Louisiana water thrush, and I know if I wait long enough, they're going to come down to the water. Louisiana water thrush, they like to sing. They're very, very loud along the streams. Sometimes you can hear them often before you see them. But one thing I know about Louisiana water thrush is eventually it's going to want to feed. And if I can put myself in a position down by the water and blend in and be really, really quiet, maybe throw some camouflage on, we'll see if that bird will eventually come down. And here's a really good example. You could see pretty much unaware of my presence because I know where he's eventually going to go. Now listen, this isn't going to work every single time. I can tell you a lot of times when I've predicted behavior and anticipated behavior and it really just never occurred. So I'm down at the stream bank, I'm sitting low, I'm waiting for an hour and nothing happens because that bird decided maybe to feed somewhere else. But given enough time, you can get some really interesting shots. And we always talk about, trying to get a shot that might be a little bit different. But when you get a shot that's like eye level on a stream bank or in the water, to me, it feels a little bit different and is a style that I really, really like. So a little bit of field work in here, making sure you're quiet and still and kind of becoming part of the environment. But a lot of it is predicting what's going to happen. Now I'm going to transition here out of routines. I talked about feeding. We're going to talk about mating behavior. And this is, I'm just going to show you two quick examples, one bird example, one non-bird example. This image is by Wolfland Hochlinter and observed, and this is what's really neat when you get a chance to just really watch the way birds act. Observed this behavior, which I believe to be a mating behavior, with these two northern flickers kind of looking at each other, and then they were almost like mirroring each other a little bit. I've never seen this behavior, but I thought it was a really great example. I wanted to include it here. Another behavior often associated with mating, and this is one of mine, and if you guys know me, you know I don't shoot a lot of big game or these megafauna, but I came across some muskox up in Alaska. The time of year wasn't really ideal for what you're seeing, but this is a different type of mating behavior. You may hear like the term rut used. So when males become very aggressive, they often become very territorial. They will often try to show dominance, and they get into these engaged battles. You may see this with things like elk or moose, maybe even deer. Muskox have this behavior, rams have this behavior, and for muskox, there's this powerful kind of interaction where they ram each other with their heads. Now, I am dying to replicate this much better. I'm not necessarily proud of the artistic merits of this photo. One day I dream about being up in an area where these muskox, by the way, they live above the Arctic Circle generally. I dream about being in a scene where I can get that interaction. Part of it will be, if I want to maximize this behavior, I need to understand the species, and in this case, the time of the year. So while this behavior for me happened in the middle of summer, if I want to capture this behavior, more likely I'll need to know when that rut time period occurs. And I believe in this case, it would be a little bit later in the summer, late summer, early fall, which is typical of mammals, by the way. So whether, again, elk, moose, each have a different period, but it's often, and different geographically depending on where you live. But knowing that, if this is the interaction you're looking for, it really will help you to pick out the right time of year. So again, we've talked about, just recap real quick, habitat nesting, migratory patterns, routines, daily routines, feeding behaviors, and now we're going to get into mating. And I'm going to talk a little bit about social interactions and just the way two birds or two animals can interact together. Now, I didn't have a great example of this. I'm going to put it over here as just an interaction, because there are certain behaviors that you can predict within species on how they will interact as a group. Again, we talked about feeding young and nesting. That would certainly be a social interaction, but there are occasionally periods of time where just two animals might interact a certain way. Now, another behavior that we can look at is grooming. This is a really interesting behavior that could be a little bit different by species, might often be specific to an individual, so we'll probably cover this topic again in another video, but I just wanted to show this really pretty oyster catcher, which I observed early morning. I noticed the routine was that these oyster catchers would go down near the water, they would kind of drink and bathe a little bit, then they would come out of the water, and that's when the preening occurred. So rather than take, focus, if there's 8 or 10 oyster catchers, focus on the ones that are just being still or showing some nice poses and portraits. Now I'm going to focus on the one that just came out of the water, and I'm going to try to get this preening behavior. So preening is a really good opportunity. It often offers a lot of interesting poses. And in this case, I thought that was really, really nice pose. Movement patterns. I want to talk a little bit about this one because species, not just the individuals, but the species may act a certain way and may move in a certain pattern. So I've got 2 images here to show you. This one by Jerry Ramsey. And Jerry noticed that these brown pelicans would fly a specific way at a specific time of day. So vacationing, seeing what's going on. Hey, let me grab my camera. This seems to be occurring over and over and over again. This pattern that they're flying in is very consistent. Let me also time it with the time of day. And one thing, and I don't know how well it's going to come across on YouTube, but I like it, but right back here, these whites have these pink tones in it. I find that really, really appealing. I know this is getting toward the end of the day, and a really, really nice example of predicting a movement to get the result. I'll show you even what I think is probably the summary of this video. Understanding movement and behavior, and in this case, the way a species acts. So what we're looking at here is a horned grebe. Now, the way horned grebes feed is they dive. And this image is by Cami Freed. She sent me the backstory. I know Cami well, and she talked about this idea that we have. I've talked about it on Patreon. I've probably talked about it over here as well, the dive and dash. Understanding the bird. Now, on my Patreon channel, I actually showed me out in the field doing dives and dashes. Like, this is the subject. Here's what I'm going to try to do. This is where I'm going to set up. I did the whole thing. I would guarantee you being there, this is exactly the way Cami did this, is from a distance. I see the subject, I know the subject. Cami's a birder, she knows how this thing is going to act. It's by itself, which is great because there's nothing else to disrupt it. When it dives underwater, I'm gonna go set up. What's interesting about this, and as a wildlife photographer, I talk about engagement sometimes, when things come at you, when the wildlife is moving toward the viewer, it will always feel more engaging. And in this case, you're a wildlife photographer, the subject beat you to the spot, but you knew its behavior, you did the dive and dash, you got down to that shoreline, and you set up, and the bird is still acting naturally. So I thought just an absolutely wonderful example of predicting the behavior, and in this case, predicting the pattern, the movement pattern of the bird, putting yourself in position and being ready. So wonderful, wonderful example. Now, I'm gonna show you a couple over here because the next idea around behavior is just resting behaviors. Now, I do a little bit of macro photography. Over the years, I've become more and more involved in macro, and I really, really enjoy it. For those of you that know me, you know I'm a native plant gardener. I've got 200 species of native plants on 1 acre here in Pennsylvania, and I've evolved a lot of my time and energy into capturing some of that. I would still like to continue to grow as a macro photographer and improve my macro photography, but part of what has gotten me much better is understanding now the behavior of the insects on my property. I'm going to show you two examples of this one. This one is my own, but these bumblebees, they sleep. When the temperatures drop down and they get cool in the summer, if I can get like a 50-degree morning and I can get out there right at sunrise, those little eastern bumblebees will be sleeping on my flowers. I kind of know the areas they like to sleep in as well. So it allows me not to just get a good photo, but now I can work on composition. So I took this one as an illustration of composition by understanding the behavior, knowing the subject would probably be in this area, and now I get to play around because it's not going to move. So I position it between the two petals of this coneflower and I get what I think is a really nice image. I'm going to show you one more, this one from Barb Ward Blank. This is a robber fly. I did a workshop. I do some macro workshops here at my property. Barb was here for a workshop, and we know this, the subject here, these are called robber flies. We know their behavior, and we know where they're going to be, and this resting posture that they have, they do not move. So what we could do is we could actually take advantage of this and get really, really close. We played around with that. We took some ultra macro images out in the field, doing like really, really close work. And you do have to be a little bit careful. They will fly off eventually, but they always perch on the end of this plant. This is called jump seed, but they're always there, dozens if not more. So we had an opportunity again to play around with composition. I really, really liked this simple composition using, by the way, green as a background. So I know the scene. So Barb worked her way to ensure that we had a green, not a brown or a gray background, thinking that those eyes would pop against the green. So orange and green, in terms of color theory, work very well together. And I thought that was a really, really great example of a resting posture. The last one we're going to talk about, we got two more to talk about. I'm going to show you this image. This is one of mine, predatory behavior. How does this play into? Now, this could be in a lot of different areas. So this is an ambush bug. Again, I want to reference a little bit of macro work here. Maybe it's a raptor that you're anticipating the behavior of the way a raptor may hunt. It could be another species anticipating the way it's going to hunt. Ambush bugs are predators, and they literally lie in wait. And knowing that, it allows me to go to where I think they're going to be. And I know a couple things. If I'm working on an ambush bug, their behavior is static. They do not move at all. So I can go out into the field, as long as it's not windy, I can set up right in the field. Or in this case, I actually took the flower, I brought it into my studio, I worked with it for about 15 minutes. I went right back out to the patch that it was. I put it right back on the same flower or the same plant I had taken this flower from, and I put it back on there and I let them be. But knowing that about this insect, it allowed me to work with it differently because I understood the behavior. Now, the last concept around this whole video is going to be, how do things respond to stimulus? I'm going to show you one example of this. I am going to talk about maybe a little story here as I recap, but let me go into this last example. Now, this is a horned lark. I shot this a couple years ago. By the way, I was just out the other day looking for horned larks. And the reason is because it was supposed to snow here. We're supposed to get about 3 to 4 inches of snow. It's ideal for horned larks. I'll explain how this ties into the video. But I went out there, we only got about 1 inch of snow. And in the area where I went for the horned larks, there wasn't that much snow. So we did see some horned larks, did not get the photographs I wanted. Here's the response to stimulus. In this case, the event is the snow. But what happens is, and the reason it works with horned larks is as the roads get plowed, these snowbanks pile up. The horned larks who feed in fields and rely on seeds have a little tougher time finding the seeds and will often work toward these snowbanks to look for food along the side of the road. Now, knowing that behavior, now if I just went out and said every day of the year I'm going to go out and try to shoot horned larks, I would be out there 360 days of failure and maybe get 5 days of success. But if I know how they respond to this stimulus, this snow event, and in this case, the plowing of roads, I could go out 3 times and probably get 2 good shots or 2 good days of activity. So understanding behavior, critical for certain species, and this is one of those species, I think it's one of the best examples I could provide of how a bird changes its behavior based off of a certain stimulus. Now I'm gonna go back to my full screen here. I'm going to list all of them over here on the side that we talked about today. And again, I just want to re-thank all of my Patreon members for their submissions. We're going to do 3 parts on this video, and they're going to submit images for all 3. This one is specifically about species. I remember a story. I'm going to tell you this story as we wind down here about responding to stimulus and how really understanding the behavior of your subjects helps. And here's the story. So I'm out in the woods, and in this area of Pennsylvania, we get ovenbirds. In some areas, we get a lot of ovenbirds. Sometimes in late spring, early summer, you can walk through the woods and just hear nothing but ovenbirds calling. Now, ovenbirds are ground nesting birds. They live on the floors of the forest. And as they were calling, this wasn't really my target, so we were just kind of hiking through. The person I was with said, hey, we should try to call these ovenbirds and see if we could get a photo. Now, calling just using like playback, so using some kind of audio signal, the sound of the bird to attract the birds. And by the way, very careful, you gotta be very careful with this for a couple of reasons. Playback can be disruptive if used too much. You could do a whole videos on just the use of playback. There's a lot of studies out there about it, so feel free to research this on your own. I'm not gonna do a video on that, but the point of this story was, I know ovenbirds. I mean, this is one of the birds of my area. And so I said to the person, we're not going to do that. So we just kept walking. And the reason I explained as we were walking is I know how ovenbirds will respond in a territorial response. So these are ground-dwelling birds. Now, if I'm going to shoot an ovenbird, what I would like to do is predict the behavior, set up down low, know where it's going to be or think I know where it's going to be, and wait for it to move in that area. That's how I like to photograph birds. What I'm not going to do is set up a tripod and play that bird call, because what that ovenbird is almost always going to do is jump up and defend a territory, meaning it's going to go up high, which isn't really good for photographs. The other thing it's going to do is probably start to display a territory. So it's going to start to move over my head and not down where I want it to be. I have this idea about photographing birds in kind of like these natural, even songbirds, in these natural, relaxed poses. And maybe there's a video story out there that I'll do one day on that. But that's an example of a stimulus that could actually be negative. And often we think of these stimulus as positive, but birds or animals will respond to stimulus, and sometimes the stimulus that we can try to provide can actually be a negative. Now, in the beginning of this video, I asked you a question about wildlife photography and what actually can make you better. Is it the study of your subjects, or is it the study of the photography craft? If you didn't answer that question, make sure you answer it down in the comments. And if you have any comments, if you enjoyed the video, let me know down below. I really do appreciate you watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So down there, hit the subscribe button. You know the drill. Hit the bell for notifications. Give it a thumbs up and a like. That'll push this video out and let other like-minded people see it. Thanks for watching this video today. And as always, to my wildlife photography friends, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.